The smoke over Pearl Harbor had barely disappeared when America demanded revenge. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese attack shattered the illusion of safety across the Pacific. Battleships burned in the harbor, sailors died trapped beneath twisted steel, aircraft exploded before they could even leave the ground. In only a few hours, the United States suffered one of the greatest military humiliations in its history, and for the first time in generations, Americans felt vulnerable. Newspapers across the country carried images of destruction. Families listened to radio broadcasts in silence. Anger spread from city streets to military headquarters. Millions wanted the same thing. Retaliation, but in early 1942, revenge seemed impossible. Japan was expanding across the Pacific at terrifying speed. Hong Kong had fallen. The Philippines were collapsing. American forces retreated from island after island while Japanese victories shocked the world. Tokyo looked untouchable. No American bomber possessed enough range to strike Japan and safely return. Aircraft carriers could not move close enough without risking destruction. Military experts believed any direct attack on the Japanese mainland was nearly suicidal. Yet inside the United States military, one dangerous idea slowly began taking shape. If America could not reach Japan normally, perhaps it would do something nobody expected. The man chosen for the mission was Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle. Jimmy Doolittle was already famous long before World War II. He was a brilliant pilot, aviation pioneer, and fearless risk-taker. He had raced aircraft, broken flying records, and earned respect throughout the military aviation world. But even Doolittle understood how insane this mission sounded. The plan was almost unbelievable. 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers would launch from the deck of an aircraft carrier deep in the Pacific Ocean. Medium bombers were never designed for carrier operations. The runway aboard a carrier was dangerously short. One mistake during takeoff would send aircraft crashing directly into the sea. Even worse, the crews would have almost no chance of returning safely. After bombing Japan, they would continue west toward China because there was not enough fuel to fly back to the carrier. If anything went wrong, the crews would likely die or be captured. Still, volunteers stepped forward. Young pilots, navigators, engineers, and gunners quietly gathered for secret training. Most had no idea where they were going at first. They only knew they were preparing for an extremely dangerous operation. At a hidden airfield in Florida, crews practiced impossible takeoffs. Pilots pushed heavy bombers into the air using only a fraction of normal runway distance. Again and again, they trained while military officials kept the mission secret from almost everyone. The pressure was enormous. One failed takeoff could destroy an aircraft instantly, but slowly the impossible became possible. The crews learned how to lift fully loaded bombers into the air with astonishing precision. Extra fuel tanks were installed inside the aircraft to extend range. Every unnecessary piece of equipment was removed to reduce weight. The bombers themselves looked unusual by the time preparations ended. Lean, stripped down, built for one dangerous purpose. Then came the voyage across the Pacific. In April 1942, the aircraft carrier USS Hornet sailed into the ocean carrying 16 massive B-25 bombers strapped to its deck. Sailors stared at the aircraft in disbelief. Many had never seen medium bombers aboard a carrier before. It looked absurd, like something that should never work. The Pacific Ocean remained tense and unpredictable during the journey. Japanese submarines patrolled nearby waters. Enemy ships could appear at any moment. If Japan discovered the task force before launch, the entire mission might fail before it even began. For days, the fleet moved westward through rough seas under strict radio silence. Then disaster nearly struck. On the morning of April 18th, American forces detected a Japanese patrol boat ahead of the fleet. The enemy vessel almost certainly transmitted warnings before being destroyed. Suddenly, everything changed. The bombers were supposed to launch closer to Japan to save fuel. But now the Americans feared Japanese forces were alerted. There was no time left. The raid had to begin immediately. That decision made the mission even more dangerous. The bombers would now launch hundreds of miles farther from Japan than originally planned. Fuel shortages became almost guaranteed. Crews understood many would probably never reach safety. Still, nobody backed down. One by one, the bombers rolled toward the edge of the carrier deck. The ocean below crashed violently against the ship. Strong winds shook the aircraft. Sailors watched silently as pilots prepared for takeoff with barely enough runway ahead of them. Then Jimmy Doolittle pushed his bomber forward. The engines roared. The aircraft accelerated across the short deck while waves exploded beneath the carrier. For a terrifying moment, the bomber seemed too heavy to fly. Then suddenly it lifted into the air. Cheers erupted from the carrier. One after another, all 16 bombers launched successfully into the sky. Against all odds, the impossible mission was underway. Hours later, the American bombers approached Japan. For many Japanese civilians, the morning appeared completely ordinary at first. People walked through city streets. Workers moved through factories. Children attended school. Few believed enemy bombers could possibly reach the Japanese mainland. Japan itself felt protected by distance and military success. Then air raid sirens began screaming. At first, confusion spread across Tokyo. Some military officials believed the approaching aircraft were friendly planes. Others thought the warning must be a mistake. But within moments, explosions ripped across the city. American bombers thundered over Tokyo at low altitude while dropping bombs onto military and industrial targets. Fires erupted across warehouses, factories, fuel storage areas, and military installations. Smoke climbed into the sky. Panic spread through the streets. For the first time since the war began, enemy bombers attacked the Japanese capital itself. The psychological impact was enormous. The physical destruction remained limited compared to later bombing campaigns, but that was never the mission's true purpose. The raid shattered the image of Japanese invulnerability. America had struck back, and nobody in Tokyo expected it. Japanese anti-aircraft guns opened fire desperately as bombers crossed the city. Searchlights scanned the sky. Fighter aircraft scrambled too late to stop most of the attackers. Meanwhile, the American crews faced terrifying conditions. Fuel levels dropped rapidly. Enemy fire filled the air. Some bombers encountered mechanical failures while crossing Japan. Every crew understood they still faced the most dangerous part of the mission: escape. After bombing their targets, the aircraft turned toward China. Night approached quickly while weather conditions worsened. Rainstorms and darkness swallowed the sky. Fuel gauges dropped lower and lower inside each bomber. Soon the truth became unavoidable. Most aircraft would never reach their planned airfields. Crews prepared for crash landings or parachute jumps into unknown territory. One by one, bombers disappeared into darkness over China. Some crews baited out moments before their aircraft crashed into mountains or fields. Others survived violent emergency landings in remote villages. Several airmen suffered serious injuries during escape attempts, but worse dangers waited below. Japanese forces occupied large sections of China and immediately launched massive manhunts for the American raiders. Captured crew members faced brutal treatment. Some were executed. Others died from starvation, torture, or disease while imprisoned. Chinese civilians who helped American airmen also paid a horrifying price. Enraged by the raid, Japanese forces launched brutal retaliatory campaigns across parts of China. Entire villages suffered massacres. Tens of thousands of civilians were killed during Japan's search for surviving American crews. The human cost became devastating. Meanwhile, back in the United States, news of the raid exploded across newspapers and radio broadcasts. America desperately needed hope after months of defeat, and suddenly it had won. Headlines celebrated the attack on Tokyo. Citizens crowded around radios listening to reports about the daring mission. Military morale surged. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, Americans felt the war could actually be won. President Franklin Roosevelt even joked about the bombers launching from the fictional place called Shangri-La to protect mission secrecy. But behind the humor stood something deeply important. The raid proved Japan was vulnerable. Inside Japanese leadership circles, the reaction was shock and humiliation. Military commanders could not understand how American bombers reached Tokyo. Questions spread rapidly through the Imperial Japanese Navy. If the United States could strike the Japanese homeland once, it might do so again. That fear influenced major strategic decisions afterward. Some historians believe the humiliation of the Doolittle Raid pushed Japan toward the disastrous Battle of Midway only weeks later. Japanese leaders became obsessed with destroying American aircraft carriers before another attack could happen. That decision changed the Pacific War forever. At Midway, Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers in a catastrophic defeat that permanently weakened its naval power. And in many ways, the road toward Midway began with 16 bombers flying toward Tokyo. Jimmy Doolittle himself believed the mission had failed at first. Nearly all aircraft were lost. Crews scattered across China, several men captured or killed. Doolittle expected punishment for losing every bomber under his command. Instead, he returned home as a national hero. The raid achieved something larger than physical destruction. It restored American confidence. It showed courage could overcome impossible odds. And it proved innovation and daring could strike even the most protected enemy. For the bomber crews, however, the memories never disappeared. Many remembered the freezing wind over the Pacific before launch. Others remembered the terrifying silence inside their aircraft while approaching Tokyo. Some never forgot the faces of Chinese civilians who risked death to help them escape. War transformed ordinary young men into symbols of resilience, yet beneath the heroism existed brutal reality. World War II was becoming a conflict without limits. Cities would burn, millions would die, entire nations would collapse beneath industrial warfare on a scale humanity had never seen before. The Doolittle Raid represented only the beginning, but psychologically it mattered enormously. Japan learned its homeland was not unreachable. America learned revenge was possible. And the world witnessed how far nations would go after Pearl Harbor. Today, the image of B-25 bombers launching from an aircraft carrier still feels unreal. Even modern historians sometimes pause when imagining the scene. 16 heavy bombers, a narrow carrier deck, rough Pacific waves, and young crews willingly flying toward what many believed was a one-way mission. It remains one of the boldest operations in military history, not because of massive destruction. Not because of huge casualties, but because it succeeded through pure audacity. The raid carried a message far louder than the bombs themselves. America was still fighting. And after Pearl Harbor, that message changed everything. Long after the smoke disappeared from Tokyo, the legend of the Doolittle Raid survived. Veterans told stories about the mission for decades. Historians studied every detail. Filmmakers recreated the dangerous takeoffs and desperate escapes, because deep down, people understood something timeless about the raid. Sometimes history changes not through overwhelming power, but through courage powerful enough to shock the world. And on a stormy April morning in 1942, 16 American bombers carried that courage across the Pacific sky toward Japan.